In this video, I'll go over setting up an automated home media server on a Synology NAS using the arr-apps Prowlarr, Sonarr, and Radarr, Plex as the media server, and qBittorrent along with GlueTUN for torrent downloading over a VPN connection, all set up through Container Manager. To begin, I want to start with a high-level overview of how the applications that I just mentioned will work together to create an automated home media server. Most of you should be familiar with BitTorrent, and for this video, we'll be using the qBittorrent client, which, from what I'm finding, may be the most popular BitTorrent client for this type of setup. qBittorrent will be configured along with GlueTUN, which is a VPN client designed to run as a Docker container as its own project in Container Manager. This setup will ensure that qBittorrent always uses a secure and private VPN connection when downloading torrent files. Prowlarr is an indexer that we'll use to connect to torrent trackers, which, in essence, takes the place of visiting and searching a torrent website directly. Prowlarr is then connected to Sonarr, which automates TV series downloads, and Radarr, which does the same for movies. You'll use Sonarr and Radarr to initiate your downloads using qBittorrent, which both applications will be configured to use. Once the download of a TV show or movie completes, qBittorrent, Sonarr, and Radarr will automatically move the file into folders that Plex will have access to. Then, when you launch your Plex client and bring up your media libraries, you can start watching the newly downloaded TV show or movie. Prowlarr, Sonarr, and Radarr, along with Plex, will make up another Container Manager project in the setup we'll go through in this video. Let's get started by first installing Container Manager and the text editor applications from the Package Center. Once both are installed, you'll want to bring up Control Panel, select Shared Folder, and create a new shared folder that you'll want to name arr-data. It is also recommended not to enable the recycle bin, so you'll want to uncheck the box, and I always recommend turning on Enable Data Checksum for advanced data integrity if your setup allows. After the shared folder is created, you'll want to create a new user specifically for this setup, so bring up the User and Group Control Panel and click Create to bring up the User Creation Wizard. You'll then want to give the user a name, generate or enter a password for the user, which you don't need to remember because you'll never need to log in with this user. Make sure the user is only part of the user's group. Enable read-write access to the arr-data and Docker shared folders, and select no access to any other shared folders you have set up. You'll also want to deny user permissions for all applications, then click through the remaining steps to complete the setup. Next, open the Terminal and SNMP Control Panel and enable the SSH service. Then, you'll want to bring up a terminal application and SSH into the NAS. Once logged in, run the ID command along with the name of the user you created to get the UID and GID of the user, and make note of those numbers, which we'll use later in the setup. Back in DSM, we'll now want to set up the folder structure for this project. To do this, you'll want to bring up FileStation, then create a Media and Torrents folder under the arr-data shared folder. Then create a Movies and TV subfolder under the Media folder. Next, under the Torrents folder, again create a Movies and TV subfolder along with a Completed and Incomplete subfolder. Next, select the Docker shared folder and create an arr-apps folder within it. Then, within the arr-apps folder, create the subfolders Plex, Prowlarr, Radarr, and Sonarr. Now, from the terminal session to your NAS, you'll want to change directory to the arr-apps directory under the Docker shared folder and issue this wget command to download the docker-compose.yml file from the Trash Guides Synology templates listing. Then do the same for the .env file that is available as well. I'll include the wget commands as well as the actual docker-compose.yml and .env files either in the description or in the pinned comment for this video. Next, let's issue this chown command to assign the r-user account ownership to the arr-data and arr-apps folder. Then run this chmod command to change permissions for those same folders. I'll include these commands in the description below as well. Now let's edit the docker-compose.yml file that we just downloaded by launching the text editor application from within DSM and open the file, which is located under the arr-apps folder from within the Docker shared folder. Once open, the only thing that needs to be done is remove the bazaar section of the file, because we won't be using bazaar in this setup. If we look at the remaining sections of the file, we can see that Radarr, Sonarr, Prowlarr, and Plex are the containers that will be created. You'll then want to save the file, then open the .env file by first changing the file type to all files, which will make the .env file visible. Once open, change the compose project name entry to arr-apps, change docker config dir to the arr-apps directory that we created earlier, change docker storage dir to the arr-data directory that we created earlier as well, update PUID and PGID with the UID and GID of the user that you created, and set the TZ entry to the time zone that you are in. The other entries listed can be ignored, so you can save the .env file and close both files that are open in the text editor application. At this point, you can launch Container Manager, select Project, and click Create to start the Create Project wizard. Here, you'll want to give the project a name, set the path to the arr-apps folder from within the Docker shared folder, leave it at the option to use the existing docker-compose.yml file, and click OK. Now, being that we've already configured both the docker-compose.yml and .env files for this project, we can click through the remaining windows and click Done to complete the setup and start the project. If, after the images used for the project are downloaded and the containers are created and started, you get an exit code of 0, the arr-apps should be set up fine, and you can move on with the setup, which will be configuring qBittorrent with GlueTUN. To start off, you'll want to bring up FileStation and create a qBittorrent GlueTUN folder within the Docker shared folder. Then, within that folder, create separate GlueTUN and qBittorrent folders. Next, bring up Control Panel, select Task Scheduler, and create a user-defined script from the Triggered Task option. Here, you'll want to set up a task that enables the TUN or tunnel kernel module to be loaded on boot, because GlueTUN will be using the TUN device when establishing a VPN connection. Once you're done setting up the TUN task, select and run it. This should load the module, and you can confirm that the TUN device is loaded by bringing up your SSH session and run this command, which lists the TUN device. If you get an error, then you'll want to double check the scheduled task and try again. If everything is fine up to this point, you'll want to bring up Container Manager once again and create a new project for qBittorrent and GlueTUN. You'll want to give the project a name. Set the path to the qBittorrent GlueTUN folder that you created under the Docker shared folder. Select Create docker-compose.yml for source and paste in the docker-compose.yml for qBittorrent and GlueTUN that you'll find either in the description or in the pinned comment for this video. Nothing needs to change in the file if you've been following along, so you can click through the next few windows. Uncheck the Start the Project Once It Is Created checkbox and click Done. Next, bring up the text editor application. Create a new document and paste in the .env file for qBittorrent and GlueTUN, which you'll again find in the description or the pinned comment below. For the setup in this video, I'll be using Privado VPN as the VPN service provider, and if you'd like to do the same, you can use my affiliate link, which you'll find in the description and pinned comment below. If you aren't familiar with Privado VPN, they provide a zero-log VPN based out of Switzerland, which provides some of the best consumer privacy laws in the world. They also have a free plan that you can take advantage of before committing, so consider giving Privado VPN a try. For the setup in this video, I'll be using OPENVPN as the VPN type, which requires entering in my OPENVPN username and password. For server region, I chose California, but you can choose one that works best for you by running this command from your SSH session. Then change server regions in your .env file. The PUID and PGID should be replaced with the UID and GID of the user you created earlier. TZ should be changed to your time zone, and the WebUI port should be the port number that you'd like to access qBittorrent on. When done making the changes to your .env file, save it under the qBittorrent GlueTUN folder under the Docker shared folder. Then close the text editor application and start up Container Manager once again. You'll then want to select the qBittorrent GlueTUN project. Click on the Action menu and select Build to download and start the qBittorrent and GlueTUN containers. If you get an exit code of 0, then the project built properly and should be running. At this point, select the qBittorrent container, click on Log, and mouse over the log entry for the temporary password that was created for the admin account and make note of the password. You'll then want to bring up another browser tab, enter the IP address of your Synology NAS and port 8090 to bring up the qBittorrent WebUI, and log in as admin using the temporary password that you just noted. Once logged in, you'll want to change the admin password by selecting Options, then WebUI, and enter the password you want to use under the Authentication section. Once that is done, I recommend logging out, then logging back in to confirm that the new password is working properly. Now bring up Options again and select Downloads. Here you'll want to change the default torrent management mode to automatic. Change the When Default Save Path Change to Relocate Affected Torrents, and do the same for the When Category Save Path Changed option as well. You'll also want to change the default save path to Data Torrents Completed, as well as enable the Keep Incomplete Torrents In option and change the path to Data Torrents Incomplete. Once those changes are done, save the changes, then bring up Options again and select Advanced. From here, you'll want to change the network interface to TUN 0 to limit qBittorrent to only use the tunnel interface, then save the changes once again. At this point, qBittorrent should be configured to work with the arr-apps properly. Now let's confirm that qBittorrent is using GlueTUN and the VPN that we've configured. To do this, bring up your SSH session and run this curl command, which should return the IP address that is assigned to you by your internet service provider. Next, run this docker exec command to log in to the qBittorrent container, then run the same curl command you ran earlier. The IP address that is returned should be different from the one that you got earlier, which indicates that qBittorrent is using the VPN connection established by GlueTUN. Now we can start configuring the arr-apps that we've set up, and we'll start with Prowlarr by bringing up another browser tab, enter the IP address of your Synology NAS, and connect to port 9696. Once the Prowlarr web UI loads, you'll get this authentication required window where you'll need to configure an authentication method and create an account. You can select what works best for you, but for this video, I'll select basic browser pop-up for authentication method. Leave authentication required as enabled, and enter in a username and password that I'd like to use, and click Save. As mentioned in the intro of this video, Prowlarr is an indexer manager that Radarr and Sonarr will use to search for movies and TV shows. So let's start the setup by clicking on the Add New Indexer button, and what I'll do is limit the indexers that are listed by selecting Torrent for protocol, set the language to English US, set privacy to public, and select a public torrent site that I'd like to use. This will bring up this Add Indexer window that will allow you to test if the site is accessible, and if it is, you can click Save to add it to the list of indexers that will be used. You can add additional indexers by clicking on the Add Indexers button as well. Next, we'll want to configure Radarr and Sonarr to be able to use the indexers that we've just added to Prowlarr. And this is done by selecting Settings, then Apps, then clicking on the plus sign button under Applications. We'll start with Radarr, so click on its listing to bring up this Add Application window. Then change the Prowlarr and Radarr server URLs to use the IP address of your Synology NAS. You'll then need the API key for Radarr, which you'll get from Radarr itself, so bring up another browser tab and connect once again to your NAS's IP address on port 7878. Radarr also requires you to set up authentication, so you'll want to do that, and in my case, I use the exact same authentication method along with username and password that I used in Prowlarr to keep things consistent between the apps. Once logged in, go to Settings, then General, then copy the API key. Now, switch back to Prowlarr and paste the API key in the Radarr setup window. You can then click Test to see if the connection between Prowlarr and Radarr has been established. Then, if everything tests out fine, click Save. We'll do the same setup for Sonarr, so click on the plus sign button, then select Sonarr. Change the Prowlarr and Sonarr server URLs to the IP address of your Synology NAS. Then bring up another browser tab and connect to your Synology NAS IP address on port 8989. Again, set up authentication like you did for Prowlarr and Radarr. Then click on Settings, then General, and copy the API key. Switch back to Prowlarr and paste in the API key in the Sonarr setup window. Then test the connection, and if everything checks out, click Save to finish up the Sonarr setup in Prowlarr. This also completes the setup needed for Prowlarr, so we can now move on to further configure Sonarr and Radarr. We can start with Sonarr, so bring up its tab once again, then select Media Management under Settings. You'll then want to click on Show Advanced and make sure that the Use Hard Links instead of Copy is enabled, which seems to be the default, but it's always good to check. Next, scroll down to the Root Folder section, then click on Add Root Folder. From here, you'll want to select Data, then Media, then select TV for Sonarr, and lastly, click OK. Next, select Download Client, click on the plus sign button under Download Clients, and select qBittorrent under the Torrent section. From the Add Download Client setup window, you'll want to change the host entry to the IP address of your Synology NAS. Change the port to 8090, which is what we've assigned to qBittorrent. Then enter in the username admin and the password set up earlier when configuring qBittorrent. Once done, select Test, and if no issues, click Save. Now switch to Radarr, where we'll basically do the same thing. Select Media Management under Settings. Click Show Advanced Settings and make sure the checkbox to use hard links instead of copy is enabled. Under the Root Folder section, click Add Root Folder and set the path to Data, Media, then Movies, and click OK. Next, click on Download Clients, click the plus sign button to bring up the Add Download Clients window, and select qBittorrent under the Torrent section. From the qBittorrent Client Setup window, enter the IP address of your Synology NAS under Host, change the port number to 8090, then enter the admin username and password. Test the connection, and if no issues, click Save. At this point, the arr-apps are configured, and we'll finish up the setup by configuring Plex as our media server. So bring up another browser tab and connect to your Synology NAS on port 32400 and add a /web at the end of the URL. This will bring you to the Plex web sign-in page, and in my case, I already have an account set up with Plex, so I'll log in with my account to continue. You'll want to log in with your Plex account as well, or create an account with Plex to continue. Once you're logged in, you'll want to click through these first few windows to get to the server setup page. Here you want to give the server a name, then click Add Library and add a library for movies that should point to the Data, Media, Movies folder. You'll then want to add a second library for TV shows that points to the Data, Media, TV folder. You'll then want to click Next, then Done to complete the setup. Now, when either movies or TV shows complete downloading, you'll see them show up automatically in Plex in these folders. At this point, everything is running, and I'll finish up the video with a demo of using the automated home media server that was just set up. To begin, I found a list of public domain films in the United States, and I'm going to download the first one in the list, which is the film Abraham Lincoln from 1930. This is a movie, so I'll bring up Radarr, then click on Movies and Add New. Here I'll type in the film name, and the indexers that were set up in Prowlarr found the exact movie I was looking for. Now I'll click on the movie, then select Add Movie from this pop-up window. Radarr does its processing for the movie, and when done, if I click Activity, we can see that the movie is in queue for downloading. Also, if I bring up qBittorrent, we'll see that the movie is being downloaded as well. I'll let this run and come back when the movie finishes downloading. The movie finished downloading according to qBittorrent, and if I switch back to Radarr, we can see that the queue is empty, and under History, we see the details about the movie that was downloaded. Now, if I bring up Plex, select Movies, and then Library, we see that the movie is available and ready to watch. Hopefully, at this point, your automated home media server is set up as well, and if it is, consider giving this video a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. I'd also like to list a few resources that really helped me in putting together this video, which you'll find linked in the description below. If you're looking for a simpler setup for your torrenting, you may want to check out my video on specifically setting up qBittorrent and GlueTUN listed here on screen. Lastly, if you'd like to support my work or hire me to help with getting your automated home media server up and running, check out the links on screen or in the description below. Thanks so much for watching.